To earn the Leave No One Behind achievement in Baldur's Gate 3, the game says you need to save every tiefling refugee you can, but that's not even close to true. Which means that nearly every achievement guide is wrong. But I can hardly blame them, since I had to dig into the game's code to find out exactly how the achievement actually works. And it's really simple, but very strange and easier to get than you probably think. Not only will I explain the mechanics, but also some tips and tricks to give you the best chances of earning the achievement for yourself, even if you're playing as the Dark Urge. This file contains the scripting for every achievement in the game, so let's take a quick look under the hood. Leave No One Behind is number 24 down here, and it's made up of just 2 checks. If you reach the ending credits without the achievement being marked as failed, it will unlock on your account. The achievement is marked as failed if any tiefling from the list ever dies at any point in the game for any reason. That's it. There are no special exceptions for how the tiefling dies, so if you kill them yourself, they die to an enemy, or the game kills them automatically as part of the story, it's all the same. So who's on that list? Well, there are 45 living tieflings in Act 1.
Cannon! No!
Okay, make that 44. There's no way to stop him from dying, so obviously he's not part of the achievement. But what about the others? No matter what you do in Act 1, some refugees will always end up dead. These 8 have already been killed by cultists when you first reach the Shadow-Cursed lands. And remember, it doesn't matter how they die, so these poor unfortunate souls can't be on the achievement list. Arabella's parents are dead in the House of Healing, so we can check them off too. And even if you stop Arca from killing Saza, you'll still find her corpse near the goblin camp after you attend the tiefling celebration. If you skip that party, you'll keep Arca alive a little longer, but she'll still die in Act 2 right next to her friend Mimnos. Depending on how things go while recruiting Lae'zel, Demaze and Nymessa can end up dead. But if you're playing Lae'zel as your avatar, they will always die. Does that mean Lae'zel can't get the achievement? Nope, those 2 aren't on the list either. You have to be careful to keep Murkon alive since he can die a few different ways. Of course, the Harpies can kill him during the fight, but he'll also die if you just get close enough to see him and then leave the grove, or if you kill the goblin leaders without ever finding him at all. As for Nadira, depending on where you walk, she could die to the bugbear assassin without you even noticing. And these 2 are examples of who you'd think you need to save, but neither of them are part of the achievement. The list of tieflings that need to survive is so bizarre, I know it's going to be hard to believe. But I promise you, I have thoroughly tested and confirmed how this achievement works. Out of all the tiefling refugees, only these 15 need to survive until the end of the game for you to unlock the achievement. And like many other things I'm about to show you, some of these choices make no sense. Zoru is never in any danger unless you attack him yourself, or all the tieflings die together. He doesn't even show up in Act 2. Umi and Ide can't die in any situation that doesn't also kill Bex, so why bother including them? And Mole can never die in any way unless the whole group of refugees dies, so why is she on this list? Now you might be thinking, hey, that's the list of tieflings that show up in Act 3. Close, but still wrong. All 15 tieflings do make it to Act 3, but so do Mattis, Sylphie, and Murkon. Or at least he will if you saved him from the Harpies. Not even Larian knows how the achievement really works. This dev comment says, get to the end of the game without any tieflings dying, but the list of tieflings that actually matter is right up here in the same file. And for the 2nd anniversary of the game's launch, Larian celebrated by releasing some data about achievements, including Leave No One Behind. Not only does the text say that you need to stop any refugee from dying, but you see this tiefling in the picture? That's Amek, who's not on the list and can't be saved since he always dies in Act 2. But only 5% of players have this achievement? Let's see if I can bump that number up a bit. So, how do we keep those specific tieflings alive? Step 1, don't kill them. There are plenty of tieflings who aren't on the list that you're welcome to murder. Beyond that, there's not much you need to do in Act 1. You gotta convince Roland to stay in the grove, or some tieflings will die on the way to Last Light Inn, including Bex, Umi, and Ide. A few specific races and classes can change Roland's mind with no skill check, but that doesn't even matter, because if you try the persuasion option and fail, you can still pick this line to convince him for free. I know it looks like you paid him, but you don't lose any gold. If you're playing as the Dark Urge, Alfira needs special attention, but we'll get to that later. Other than her, the only tiefling you really need to save in Act 1 is Arabella. But that's pretty easy to do if you know how her snake scene works. The simplest route is to start the conversation as a druid who has the Speak with Animals buff. That'll let you talk directly to Tila and tell her to knock it off. But if you don't have a druid character handy, then we'll move on to Plan B. Many players have burned through inspiration points on this first skill check, thinking they only had one shot to keep Arabella alive. But the game gives you a lot of chances before you seal her fate. If you fail one of the first checks, you'll automatically make a passive nature skill check that is only DC 5. As long as you pass that, you get a new option that will end the conflict without needing to make another roll. If you get really unlucky and fail that passive check, you can then try to read Kaga's mind as long as you still have Shadowheart's scroll or some other source of detect thoughts. If you fail that check, or just don't have a way to cast it, you still have another intimidation or persuasion check available. And each is only DC 10 with advantage. Only failing all of those rolls will lead to Arabella's death. If at all possible, you want to avoid leading this conversation with a tiefling character since most of their rolls are more difficult to make. And you really don't want to choose that barbarian intimidation option since failing it will lead to a unique passive DC 10 wisdom check with disadvantage. Fail that and you go straight into combat. If you don't have anyone else better suited, Gale makes a good choice to take on this conversation. Due to his high intelligence score, he'd have to roll a 1 to fail that passive nature check, as well as having decent odds at making any of the active checks. If you want to use a companion for this, just split your avatar off from the group and keep them back near the door so they don't get pulled into the conversation. And even if Gale is the one that does all the talking, once the scene is over, he'll still pop up his usual reaction dialogue.
The crown of Costas.
Just make sure you save Arabella before you deal with the goblin situation, or she'll end up dead. Speaking of, you'll obviously need to take out the goblin leaders if you want to get the achievement. You can defend the grove against Minthara's raid with no tiefling casualties, but it's much safer to just take her out while she's still in the goblin camp. Pick off Gut and Ragzlin, and the tieflings are good to go for Act 2. One of the biggest potential failure points for this achievement is the fight against Marcus, so if you really want to be safe, the simplest route is to just not talk to Isabel at all. You won't get her blessing, which gives you some helpful necrotic resistance and lets you talk Squire into abandoning Ketheric during the rooftop fight in Moonrise Towers, but you can get by without it. Though if you really want that blessing but don't want to endanger Last Light Inn, then the less simple route is to walk out onto Isabel's balcony and cast Silence on the roof so that the bubble pokes down into her room. After you start the conversation with Isabel, she'll walk into the middle of the room and get silenced, preventing the follow-up dialogue with Marcus from starting. This gives you Isabel's blessing with no fight. Or just respec Shadowheart into anything other than Cleric or Paladin. Then use her to talk to Isabel and take advantage of this dialogue bug to get the blessing without Marcus showing up. Just be sure not to talk to Isabel again, or he'll still crash the party. If you decide that you just gotta fight Marcus, then you want as few tieflings as possible inside Last Light Inn when you talk to Isabel. Which means don't rescue the Moonrise prisoners yet, and let's get Roland out of the way. Speaking to him while he's drunkenly abusing some children is what starts Roland's adventure into the darkness, but he won't leave Last Light Inn until you do. After the bar scene is finished, the next time there's no party members inside the main Last Light area, Roland will teleport away from his starting spot and into the Shadow Curse right here. But his fight against the shadows won't start until those enemies see you, letting you easily set up a surprise attack from stealth. Or you can safely put off that fight and leave Roland waiting out there while you do whatever else you want, including long rest. Just make sure you go rescue him at some point before you leave Act 2. But if that's still not safe enough and you want a 100% chance of keeping Roland alive, I got a trick for you. When it's time for him to head out into the shadows, Roland moves in 2 steps. First, he disappears from Last Light Inn, then he teleports to his spot out in the Shadow-Cursed lands. But before that second step, there's a check to make sure none of your characters are already standing in the combat area so that Roland and the shadows don't suddenly appear right on top of you. The thing is, the game only makes that check once, after Roland has already disappeared from Last Light. So if you send a character to stand in the area where Roland is supposed to go, then leave Last Light Inn with the rest of your party, Roland will vanish into limbo for the rest of Act 2. But he'll still show up just fine in Act 3. You'll miss out on some XP and gold for not completing the quest after rescuing his siblings, but there's no way he can die. And don't go thinking you can skip this whole Roland rescue by just avoiding him. Even if you bring back Cal and Leah without ever talking to Roland, after they have their little family reunion, he'll still go out into the shadows to look for them, even though they're sitting right there at the bar. With Roland safely waiting at the shadows, or in an alternate dimension, Last Light is as empty of tieflings as it's going to get for now. So if you want to take on Marcus, I put a number of tips in an old video of mine, but here's a quick version. If any character has Volo's eye, send them down to guard Ceres while the rest of the group stays in Isabel's room. Pick someone to start the conversation, then swap to one of the other characters in the room and throw an invisibility potion right next to Isabel. But don't actually hit her in the head with it. Switch back to the character who's talking to Isabel and complete the dialogue to start the fight with Marcus. Exactly how things go from here depends on the initiative order, but any characters that take their turn before Isabel will focus on your party and the other NPCs. If all of the ghouls are ahead of Isabel in the turn order, you can even toss another invisibility potion on her once your turn comes back up. Just make sure you keep track of where she is and don't try to shoot through her. As for the tieflings, all of them besides Ceres will probably be impaled, but that's a good thing since it keeps them from being attacked. Bex and Damon are safely out of harm's way, but Alfira could theoretically die to AoE damage, so be careful where you're tossing things. As for the Harpers, they're all cannon fodder, so just kill whichever ghouls are close to Ceres to help keep her safe. And she can also be buffed before the fight, just like Isabel. However you handle Last Light Inn, you'll also need to rescue the prisoners from Moonrise Towers, but that's easy. Just let them sit safely in their cells while you take out both of the eyeballs, both guards, and the warden. But don't open the cell doors yet, or those dummies will go running off toward the dock. Instead, either toss Wulbren any bludgeoning weapon and wait for him to break down the walls, or just bust him down yourself with the Nair Misser. Once both groups have left their cells through the new exits, then you can open the cell doors and join them at the boat to see them off. Yeah, you can also jump up here and then break the walls from the back if you want. And it doesn't matter where you tell the group to go in the boat, they'll end up at Last Light anyway. The next tiefling that needs your help is Arabella, again, who you can find at this gate between the Masons Guild and House of Healing. All you have to do to keep her alive for the rest of the game is to agree to find her parents and tell her to go to your camp. If you already found the corpses of her parents before you talk to her, just keep that under your hat for now and tell her you'll go look for them. Because if you come right out and tell her that her parents are already dead, you'll need to pass one of these skill checks to convince Arabella to head to camp. If you fail the check or just refuse to help her in the first place, she will run off into the shadows. And after your next long rest, you'll find her dead right here near the waning moon. She'll also die in the same way if you leave Act 2 without ever talking to her at all. To keep Arabella happy so that she helps you during the final fight, you'll need to find her dead parents, go back to camp to report their fate, get Withers involved, and complete her quest. But just sending Arabella to camp is all you need to do for the achievement. If you snub her from that point on and head to Act 3, you'll never see her again, but she won't die. The last order of business for Act 2 is to save Zevlor here in the Mind Flayer colony. First tip, don't press the purge button. But before you open the pods to free Zevlor, you'll want to do a little prep work to make the fight against the Mind Flayers a bit easier. Start by clearing out all the intellect devourers in the area so that they don't get any big brain ideas about helping out during the fight. The Mind Flayers only have a +1 initiative bonus, so as long as you have at least +5, you'll be guaranteed to go first. And since you know exactly where they're going to appear, you can position your party in advance. Or even leave them a welcoming gift before you open the pods. From that point, the fight should be pretty easy, especially since Zevlor can actually deal out some decent damage. But like Roland, there is also a way to give Zevlor a 100% chance of survival, and that's to just leave him in the pod. Again, you'll lose out on some experience, but what? Orin kills Zevlor in Act 3 if you don't free him from the pod? No, she doesn't. I know that looks and sounds like Zevlor's corpse, but that's not him. The real Zevlor is still alive. I told you, none of this makes sense. You do have to free Zevlor from the pod if you want to summon him during the endgame combat, but you shouldn't do that anyway, since that's the only way the real Zevlor can die after you finish Act 2. Speaking of, the only tiefling you need to protect in Act 3 is Roland, if you plan to complete the Nightsong quest. Confronting Lorroakan the usual way would put Roland right into the middle of combat, regardless of if you side with or against Dame Aelin. But there are ways to avoid that. For starters, you can go ahead and attack Lorroakan before you report the situation to the Nightsong. You won't have her there to help you during the fight, but instead, you get the chance to position your party members however you like and begin combat from stealth to get a surprise attack. The catch is that after the fight is over, Roland will run in and demand to know what happened, and you'll need to pass a DC 18 persuasion or intimidation check to keep him from turning hostile, which may be harder than keeping him alive during the fight depending on your stats. Of course, you can avoid any chance of losing Roland by skipping the fight against Lorroakan entirely, though you'd miss out on the XP for completing the quest and the support from the tower during the final battles. However, there is a way to keep Roland completely safe while still confronting Lorroakan alongside the Nightsong. When you tell Aelin that Lorroakan is looking for her, she will fly off to prepare for the battle. 7 seconds after she disappears from your camp, Roland will teleport into Lorroakan's room, with the projection taking over his shopkeeping duties. But before sending him up there, the game does a check that Roland is able to speak so that he can take part in the confrontation dialogue. If the Nightsong flies away while Roland can't talk, he'll stay right where he is. As much as it pains me to admit it, casting silence is not the right move here. But another way to stop a character from talking is to talk to them. When a character is engaged in a conversation, they can't start a new dialogue with someone else. So, chat Roland up at the counter, then send another character back to camp to tell Nightsong what's going down in the tower. Once she flies out of your camp, go back to Sorceress Sundries to rejoin the group, tell Roland you were just browsing, and then head on up to take out Loroakan. During the fight, Roland will stay safely downstairs and be ready to join your allies just like normal as soon as you finish off his boss. If you told Arabella about her parents and completed her story arc in Act 2, you can find her down in the lower city sewers. But she'll survive just fine and still show up to help you in High Hall even if you never talk to her in Act 3. And if you did free Zevlor from his pod in the Mind Flayer colony, he will also join your forces for the endgame, so don't trip at the finish line by summoning him into combat and getting him killed. From that point, just finish off the brain and pick whichever ending you want and you'll get the achievement as soon as the credits roll. Yep, that includes the evil endings where you kill everyone in Baldur's Gate, or even the ending where you kill everyone in the world. On that note, let's help the Dark Urge save everyone's favorite bard. If you watched a previous video of mine, you're probably familiar with this river that surrounds the Blighted Village. Well, crossing it is also the trigger for Alfira to show up in your camp at night to do some redecorating. But you can convince her to stick to music instead of painting by knocking her out in the grove before you long rest. To do that, you need to toggle on the non-lethal attacks passive and hit Alfira with melee attacks until you take her down to 1 hit point. But if you just start swinging on her, she may end up calling for the guards before you land that knockout blow. The number of times you can attack her before she does this is actually dependent on your charisma score. If it's 10 or higher, Alfira will magically summon Aaron after the 3rd swing unless that's the attack that knocks her out. If a character has below 10 charisma, they only get 2 attacks before things escalate. The easiest way to get around this is to just spread your attacks between a full party of characters, since Alfira will only call the cops if the same character attacks her enough times. And you'll also want to use turn-based mode to prevent Alfira from healing between your smacks. If you don't have a party with you, then you can always use Disguise Self to change form after every attack, and Alfira will never figure out that it's really the same person hitting her over and over. Or trade her a big pile of gold to raise her attitude up to 100, giving you 5 extra swings before things turn hostile. Afterward, you can get all your gold back by robbing her while she's unconscious. Once Alfira is out cold, if you long rest immediately after crossing the river for the first time, then you'll summon this dragonborn lass with the voice of an angel. And Alfira will survive Act 1 just fine. But if you delay that long rest until you've reached the Goblin Camp Bridge and seen the vision of a handsome older elf, then the first visit from the Dream Guardian will take priority, pushing the Bard visit to the next night. Meaning you'd need to knock out Alfira a second time. The same thing will happen if you hop the river to recruit Karlach, but don't have Will in your party when you meet her, since their confrontation in camp also has higher priority. If you do have Will in your party when you talk to Karlach, then you'll be just fine, since Mazora will wait her turn until the next night after Quill before she shows up. If you liked this video, then subscribing to the channel seems like a good idea, but if you'd really like to help me out, then share this video with a friend. If you don't have any friends, then share it with an enemy, or a total stranger, I don't care, just show it to somebody. Thanks for watching.